So I'm going to talk to you about food security, nutrition and health in the Arab world more specifically, and I will be reiterating some of the points that Marie has brought up. I want to start by making the case that nutrition is a key component of food security. I will briefly cover the main nutrition and health challenges in the Arab world and give some examples from our work on food security and nutrition in Lebanon, and end with some knowledge gaps and research opportunities, hopefully to be able to move on to those sort of improving nutrition interventions. So this is the World Food Summit definition on food security, and I just want to highlight that nutritious food that meets dietary needs of people is a key component of the definition, and as people have repeatedly said today, it's not just about the number of calories, it's about the right types of foods in the right amounts. And I think that is very relevant to the Arab region. So from again, this is stuff that's been mentioned several times today, that from a macro perspective, the region is considered to be highly vulnerable to food insecurity due to our large cereal imports. And I'll show you that from a hunger perspective, this is not necessarily the case. But I want to make the case that the triple burden of malnutrition that Marie introduced, that of energy deficiency, micronutrient deficiency, and energy excess, appears and is even more apparent in food insecure pockets in the Arab world. And this is just to show that the vulnerability due to high reliance on cereal imports. So we've seen this several times today. But according to the IFPRI's Global Hunger Index, the region does pretty well in terms of hunger, in terms of undernutrition. But I want to say that this doesn't give, agglomerating the data on the region doesn't give such a good picture because there is a large amount of diversity in the Arab region. So this is the proportion of the population below the minimum level of dietary energy consumption by sub-region in the Arab world. And you'll see that the Arab least developing countries actually have, approximately a quarter of their populations that are actually not meeting energy requirements. And this is one of the challenges of the Arab world, is its diversity, is that there isn't one solution that fits all countries and all subpopulations within the region. And the region is undergoing a nutrition transition across countries, within populations, within households, and this is just to demonstrate some of these concepts. These are the rates of underweight in children under 5 in selected Arab countries, and you'll see that the range is extremely large, from about 45% in Yemen down to 3% in the occupied Palestinian territories. And I want to make a couple of points here. One is that if you look at the dates of some of these data, we don't have up-to-date numbers from many of the countries of the Arab world. So there are lacks in data, and I will make the case that we really need to be doing better in terms of nutritional surveillance in the region. And the other point I want to make is that even in the countries where prevalence is 4 or 6 or 7%, the key is trying to understand who are these 4%, 7%, and how we can actually reach them and target them. So that's another key challenge. And this is stunting. So stunting is much more common than underweight. And stunting, as Marie said, is a marker of chronic deficiency and potentially sometimes an issue of a limiting micronutrient as well. So this is much more about the quality of the diets as well as chronic deficiencies in energy. And again, here you'll see that in the least developing countries, the rates can reach as high as half of the proportion of under 5-year-old children. And these stunted children, as again Marie alluded to, are actually more at risk of becoming overweight and obese. And this is data from PAPFAM from 5 countries in the Arab region, even in the children themselves, in under 5s. What this shows is that that stunted children, everything alongside here is actually, so stunting actually increases the risk of overweight within these populations. So stunted children are actually even more likely to be overweight themselves and then become overweight adults later on. And this is the picture with regards to adult obesity. So they become obese adults, and even in countries like Sudan, who has very high rates of. I'll just go back a couple of slides. Sudan, who has very high rates of stunting of 45%, will also have up to a quarter of the population of adults being obese. So this is really very strong evidence for a double or triple burden of malnutrition in the Arab countries. And these numbers are actually, if you look at the Arab world, are actually some of the highest numbers in the world. So in comparison to the US, which has a proportion of obesity of about 33%. Countries like Jordan, the UAE, Syria, Kuwait, KSA all go above those. And that means that we really do have an epidemic on our hands in the region. And we've got the most recent data from Lebanon, from Dr. Hwela's work, showing that Lebanon, the prevalence in Lebanon is about 26%. And what is particularly striking about this number is that it is there has been a 30% increase in the rates of obesity in just the last 10 years in Lebanon. So just to show that this is actually happening very, very quickly. And is leading to a very large burden of non-communicable disease. And this is the prevalence of metabolic syndrome among adults in selected Arab countries. And this is basically at least 3 or more of the various chronic diseases. Diabetes, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia are all very common in the countries of the Arab region. And at the same time, we think we still have micronutrient deficiencies. And I say we think because the data are very poor and are lacking. And although these are data from a publication from 2011, they cite numbers from 2005, but the data are actually originally from the 1990s. And these are, in general, the most updated numbers we have from the region, pointing to the need for more surveillance on what exactly the micronutrient deficiencies that we are facing in the region are. We have some data from the region pointing to others. I mean, these are vitamin A, anemia, and iodine, which are the most common micronutrient deficiencies in the world. But we know that in the region we also have very high rates of vitamin D deficiency from work from Dr. Hajj Fleihan at AUB, but also calcium, vitamin B12, etc. might be compromised. So we really need to improve our understanding of what exactly the nutritional problems that we are facing in the region are. And now I'm just going to move on to try to show you that this triple burden actually exists and is even more pronounced in the food insecure pockets in the region. And I'm going to use data that we've collected in Lebanon. And these are data from 3 household food security surveys that we've conducted. We've developed a tool to measure household food security that actually asks subjective questions to households, but then we've also been collecting some anthropometric data alongside those. So we have data from the governorate of Tyre, which is one of the southernmost governorates that has been prone to conflict in Lebanon over the last 40 years at least. Some data from a Bedouin community that is relatively marginalized due to their history, and from Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, again, a very marginalized population. And this is just data on the prevalence of household food security. So as we go along, the x-axis, this is increasing severity. The green is data from our Tyre surveys, the red from the Bedouin, and the blue from the Palestinian. And this shows that at least half of people in the Lebanese governorate of Tyre, are vulnerable to food insecurity, and that severe food insecurity can reach in Tyre about 6% of the population. And as the subpopulations become more marginalized, severe food insecurity increases, basically. And if we try to see, to ask that question, who are these 6%? We'll find that if we look by village, for example, this is a small governorate in a small country, and you'll see a huge variety of prevalence of severe food insecurity by village. So in some villages, you don't have any severe food insecurity, and in some of the neighboring villages, just a few kilometers down the road, prevalence of severe food insecurity will reach about 40%, basically showing that we have pockets of food insecurity in a country that is relatively doing well in terms of hunger, for example. And that this food insecurity will manifest not just as increased rates of stunting. So we've got a significant increase in the prevalence of stunting in under 5-year-olds as a result of food insecurity, but also the fact that overweight doesn't differ between the severely food insecure and the non-severely food insecure, showing that severely food insecure populations are also have this double burden. They have stunted children, but at the same time, the prevalence of overweight is even higher in these subpopulations. And then from our Bedouin studies, we see that obesity in adults is also very prevalent in the severely food insecure, and there's even a trend towards higher rates of obesity in the more severely food insecure households. And then from data from the Palestinian refugee studies, we looked at predictors of severe food insecurity, and we find that a household with female-headed household, so a household with a female head would be more at risk of food insecurity. Household head, the head of the household's education level is also a predictor of severe food insecurity. So those who don't reach secondary school are much more at risk of severe food insecurity. Employment, obviously, but also the striking one is that having one member of the household having a chronic disease is a very strong predictor of severe food insecurity, showing that chronic disease is also something that is common in food insecure households.
You have 3 minutes left.
I'm almost finished. And within these households, within the food insecure households, we find significant reductions in fruit and vegetable intake, and as has been alluded to previously today, meat and dairy, with increasing levels of severe food insecurity. We also have data from our qualitative studies that point to compromises in terms of food safety, as well as dietary diversity. So we have reports from families about buying food of cheaper quality, waiting 3 or 4 days until food prices go down in a local market to be able to purchase their food. So people cope in varying ways, and one of them is compromises on quality in terms of diversity, but also in terms of food safety, potentially. So in conclusion, our studies point to the fact that there are pockets of food insecurity in a country that is relatively considered to be low hunger, for example. The predictors include education, gender, and chronic disease, and that food insecurity manifests as a triple burden of disease, with low dietary diversity, stunting, overweight, and obesity being very common in food insecure households. And this basically implies that we really need targeted programs. We need programs that we need to be able to identify these pockets. We need to think about nutrition education, improved access to healthcare and education, and potentially targeting women specifically due to the gender issues, which I'm sure are going to be discussed in the next session. And the major gaps include the lack of data or potentially access to data, more specifically on micronutrient deficiencies, on which we really have very little information. We're going to need to be conducting more nutritional surveillance to identify pockets of vulnerability and to be able to assess changes in response to shocks, whether these are food price shocks or climate change, etc., as we face these. And just from my modest observations in Lebanon, in this country, a lot of the nutrition programs are actually run by NGOs, and there's very little information about who is doing what, where, and what works. And we really don't have any lessons learned in the region about nutrition programs. So there's definitely room for governments to include nutrition in their food security strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank